There's a moment that happens to all of us, though we rarely speak about it. A moment when the very thing that's supposed to protect you, your mind, your consciousness, the voice inside your head, suddenly feels like a stranger. Not just a stranger, but something darker. Something that whispers doubts when you need confidence, that conjures fears when you're trying to sleep, that plants seeds of anxiety in the quiet moments when you should feel safe. It starts small, almost imperceptible, like a shadow at the edge of your vision that vanishes when you turn to look directly at it. But over time, that shadow grows. It learns your vulnerabilities, it studies your patterns, and eventually, it doesn't just whisper anymore, it screams. And the terrifying part? It knows you better than anyone else ever could, because it is you. Or at least it lives inside the same skull, sharing the same memories, the same traumas, the same fears you've tried so hard to bury. This is what happens when your mind turns against you. Let me tell you about Sarah. Not her real name, but her story is real, painfully, devastatingly real. Sarah was 32 years old, successful by any conventional measure. She had a career in marketing that she'd built from the ground up, a small apartment in the city that she decorated with care, friends who loved her, a family who supported her. On paper, her life looked like the kind of thing people scroll past on social media with a mixture of admiration and envy. But what no one saw, what she herself didn't fully understand for the longest time, was the war happening inside her head. It started after a promotion at work, which sounds backwards, doesn't it? Success triggering collapse? But that's exactly what happened. The promotion meant more responsibility, higher stakes, more eyes watching her every move. And somewhere in the midst of all that pressure, something in Sarah's mind shifted. It was like a switch being flipped in a dark room, except instead of light flooding in, something else emerged. Doubt. Crushing, suffocating doubt. At first, she rationalized it. Everyone gets nervous before big presentations, right? Everyone questions their decisions sometimes. But this was different. This wasn't the normal flutter of pre-meeting anxiety or the occasional second-guessing that comes with important choices. This was a voice, her own voice, telling her that she was a fraud, that everyone would soon discover she didn't deserve the promotion, that she'd somehow fooled everyone into thinking she was competent, when really she was just waiting to be exposed. Psychologists call this imposter syndrome, and while that's technically accurate, those clinical words don't capture the visceral reality of what Sarah experienced. They don't capture the feeling of waking up at 3 a.m, heart pounding, chest tight, convinced with absolute certainty that tomorrow would be the day everything fell apart. They don't capture the exhaustion of spending 8 hours at work performing confidence while your internal monologue is screaming that you're worthless. They don't capture the loneliness of sitting across from friends at dinner, smiling and nodding, while inside you're drowning and you can't even explain why, because it doesn't make logical sense. The human mind is supposed to be our greatest asset. It's the thing that separates us from other species, the magnificent biological computer that allowed us to build civilizations, create art, solve problems, love deeply, dream impossibly. But here's what they don't tell you in school, what nobody really prepares you for. That same incredible mind can become your worst enemy. Because unlike an external threat, a predator, a storm, an attacker, you can't run from your own thoughts. You can't hide from yourself. You take your mind with you everywhere you go, into every conversation, every quiet moment, every attempt at rest. And when it turns hostile, when it starts generating fear and anxiety and self-loathing faster than you can process or dismiss it, you find yourself trapped in a prison made of your own neural pathways. Sarah tried everything. She threw herself deeper into work, thinking that if she just proved herself enough, did enough, achieved enough, the voice would finally be satisfied. But achievement didn't silence it. It just moved the goalposts. Now, the voice said, she was only successful because she was lucky, because others hadn't noticed her flaws yet, because she was fooling everyone, including herself. She tried distraction, filling every free moment with activity, with noise, with anything that would drown out the internal commentary, but exhaustion only made the voice louder. She tried logic, sitting down with pen and paper to write out evidence of her competence, her accomplishments, the objective facts that contradicted the narrative in her head. But logic is a weak weapon against an irrational enemy, and her mind simply dismissed the evidence as irrelevant or twisted it into further proof of inadequacy. "Look at you," the voice would say, "so desperate for validation that you have to write yourself permission slips to exist." What makes this kind of psychological warfare so devastating is its intimacy. When your mind turns against you, it has access to everything. Every embarrassing memory you've tried to forget, every mistake you've ever made, every moment of weakness, every secret shame, every fear you've never spoken aloud. It knows exactly which wounds haven't healed and exactly how to press on them. It knows what you look like at your lowest and can paint vivid pictures of future failures with surgical precision. And because it speaks in your own voice, uses your own thought patterns, it's almost impossible to recognize it as separate from yourself. You don't think, "My anxiety is attacking me." You think, "I am worthless." You don't think, "This is my depression talking." You think, "This is the truth I've been avoiding." The thoughts feel like insights, like you're finally seeing clearly, when really you're staring at a funhouse mirror that distorts everything it reflects. For Sarah, the breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. She was sitting in her car in the parking garage at work, 15 minutes before a meeting she was supposed to lead. The presentation was ready. She knew the material. She'd done this dozens of times before. But sitting there, gripping the steering wheel, she realized she couldn't move. Her body had made a decision her conscious mind hadn't fully processed yet. It was refusing to continue. Her hands were shaking, her breath was coming in short, shallow gasps, her vision was tunneling at the edges, and in her head, the voice had reached a crescendo of certainty. "You cannot do this. You will fail. Everyone will see. This is where it ends." She called in sick that day, and the next day, and the day after that. Within a week, she was on medical leave. Within a month, she was sitting in a therapist's office, crying so hard she couldn't speak, finally admitting that something was very, very wrong. Here's what most people don't understand about mental health crises, about what happens when your mind genuinely turns against you. It's not about weakness. Sarah wasn't weak. She'd survived challenges that would have broken many people. She'd built a life through determination and effort and resilience. But the human mind doesn't operate on fairness or logic. It operates on chemistry, on neural patterns, on the accumulated weight of stress and trauma and genetic predisposition. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, despite your strength, despite everything you've survived before, something breaks. Or rather, something misfires. The threat detection systems that evolved to keep you safe from predators start firing at shadows. The stress responses designed for short-term survival start running constantly, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline until you're exhausted and wired simultaneously. The inner voice that's supposed to guide you and protect you starts generating an endless stream of catastrophic predictions and harsh judgments. But here's where Sarah's story takes a turn, and here's why I'm telling it to you. Because this isn't just a story about suffering. It's about what happens when you finally understand what's happening and start fighting back. Not against yourself, which is what Sarah had been doing for months, but against the malfunction, against the distorted thinking patterns, against the chemical imbalances and the neural pathways that had been carved deep by months of anxiety and stress. When Sarah finally understood that the voice in her head wasn't truth-telling, wasn't even really her in any meaningful sense, but it was instead a symptom of a treatable condition, something shifted. Not immediately, not magically, but gradually, painfully, through therapy and medication and the slow work of rewiring thought patterns that had become automatic, she started to separate herself from the attacks. She learned to recognize the voice for what it was, not reality, but anxiety, not insight, but distortion. She learned techniques to challenge the catastrophic thoughts, to ask questions like, what evidence actually supports this? And would I say this to a friend? And is this thought helpful, or is it just causing pain? She learned that minds can be retrained, that neural pathways can be slowly redirected through repetition and practice, that the brain has a remarkable capacity for healing when given the right support and tools. It wasn't quick, it wasn't linear. There were setbacks and dark days and moments when it felt like no progress had been made at all. But slowly, incrementally, the voice lost its power. Not because it stopped speaking, but because Sarah learned to stop believing it automatically. She learned to respond to it the way you'd respond to a malfunctioning alarm, acknowledging that it's making noise, but not evacuating the building every time it goes off. The thing is, Sarah's story isn't unique. Millions of people experience this betrayal, this moment when the mind turns from ally to adversary. Depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, panic disorders, these aren't character flaws or signs of weakness. They're malfunctions in the most complex organ in the known universe. And they can happen to anyone, the successful and the struggling, the young and the old, the strong and the vulnerable. Your mind can turn against you regardless of who you are or how hard you try to prevent it. But here's the crucial part, the part that makes this story worth telling. It doesn't have to be permanent. It doesn't have to define you. And most importantly, you don't have to fight it alone. What happens when your mind turns against you? The honest answer is, it's terrifying. It's isolating. It can destroy relationships, careers, the basic ability to function in daily life. But the other answer, the one that matters just as much, is this. You can survive it. You can learn to recognize the distortions. You can build new neural pathways. You can find medications that correct chemical imbalances. You can develop skills to manage symptoms. You can reach out for help and discover that you're not alone, that millions of others have walked this path before you and found their way through. The mind is powerful, yes, powerful enough to hurt you deeply when it malfunctions, but it's also powerful enough to heal, to adapt, to rebuild itself stronger than before. That's the paradox and the hope. The same mind that can turn against you also has within it the capacity for recovery, for resilience, for transformation. You just have to hold on long enough to remember that the voice of your anxiety, your depression, your fear, that's not your only voice. There's another one underneath, quieter maybe, but truer, and it's worth fighting to hear it again.